Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I would like to talk about some of my honest concerns, okay, about how the state could possibly prosecute Wendy Adelson, okay? Now, the concern I have, okay, and this is important, okay? Charlie has just been convicted, okay? And Charlie was convicted, I think, on a very aggressive theory. The prosecution put forward a very aggressive theory that Charlie was sort of very directly involved and directly orchestrating the killing of Dan Markel. Okay, and I think the state did that. Okay, and prosecutions tend to be very aggressive. Okay, I think the state in part did that because Charlie was very open that his defense was one that he was extorted. Okay, so Charlie's defense was that he was extorted. Okay, so what happens is the state, in trying to oppose so much Charlie's defense, they may have gone, I think, maybe a little too far. And even though they won, they got a conviction. They got a conviction maybe on a theory that maybe is a little more severe than what really happened. Okay, and that's always a risk. You can be convicted of things that aren't really true, right? So I do think that Charlie did sort of make the murder happen, but I think in reality, I think he probably wasn't that directly orchestrating of the murder. Okay, so in a sense, he may not have been extorted the way he says, but he may have sort of let himself be extorted, okay? Or he may have like given enough hints to Katie McBanois just to make it obvious that she could sort of do what looked like an extortion, okay? But that's very important because if we don't if we don't get exactly a tight theory on what happened with Charlie, if we can't like really get an accurate picture of what happened with Charlie, when we go a few links down the chain and try to figure out what happened with Donna and what happened with Wendy, if you have just a few millimeters of error in your theory of what Charlie did, that error will get expanded and it'll sort of become more severe as you go through the links of the chain. Eventually, when you get to Wendy, if the state commits itself to the theory that it had in the Charlie Adelson case, by the time they get to Wendy, that error is going to be multiplied, and it might not be a very effective theory to prosecute Wendy. Okay, so basically, kind of the theory I have, or at least the concern I have, is that maybe Charlie. I'm not going to say he was extorted, okay, but I think maybe he set himself up to be extorted, okay. He maybe sort of invited himself to be extorted, and he probably was very careful not to directly orchestrate anybody getting hurt. Okay, so maybe what Charlie did, I'm just being creative. I think in order to have an accurate prosecution, sometimes you have to sort of put on the hat of like a fiction writer and just try to be creative and think of all the ways realistically that this murder could have taken place. Okay, and so I personally think that Charlie is probably way too paranoid to actually directly orchestrate a murder. Okay. Even though he talks a big talk and he acts like a badass, I think Charlie in the end is probably too much of a coward, I think, to directly orchestrate a murder. So I think what may have happened, what seems more realistic to me, is that maybe Charlie just kind of made it real clear to Kate at some point. Maybe he kind of felt her out, like knowing that she has friends in the underworld, knowing she has contacts that are basically in the criminal world. He probably just kind of asked her questions about whether she knew people who could hurt somebody, whether she knew people who could kill somebody for money, and just kind of not saying anything that it connects to anything, like not suggesting that it had anything to do with Wendy, but just kind of like feeling her out. And then maybe once he confirmed in his mind that maybe she was connected to some really dangerous people, right? Then maybe slowly he could just start making it obvious, okay? Making it obvious that he's really upset with Wendy's husband. He's really upset at that situation. And then also letting Katie know that his family was willing to pay a lot of money to sort of solve the problem they were having with the custody battle between Dan Markel and Wendy Adelson, right? And so maybe just kind of leaving a bunch of hints, kind of like if you live, let's say, near the forest, right? If you have a house near the woods, and let's say there's bears in the woods, right? Okay, if I just leave my garbage out a lot and I don't take care of my garbage, and if I put like raw meat outside, I'm sorry, but eventually the bears are going to come, right? I'm not telling the bears to come to my house, okay? But if you leave enough bait, okay, the bears will come. Okay, and I think that was probably Charlie's approach. I think more realistically, what I think Charlie was doing was he was just leaving like steaks out, like raw meat, knowing that the bears would come and definitely come and try to get that meat. Okay, so I think maybe that's probably why he didn't give Katie the money before the murder. Okay, and this is really important. I think he would rather have the money sort of be like the stake for the bears to come and get it, as opposed to proactively giving the money to Katie. And also, there is some suggestion that they had maybe tried to hire another hitman earlier. I think there was some evidence, somebody who was in jail with Sigfrido, where I think I heard that somebody had stated that somebody in jail with Sigfrido had suggested that maybe the Adelsons had tried to hire a different hitman earlier, okay, and that those people ran away with the money. Okay, so maybe they learned their lesson, right? And maybe in this case, what Charlie did is he just held on to the money, okay, knowing that Katie would probably take care of the murder and then come and try to get the money. You see what I'm saying? But I think he planned it that way. And so I guess, and again, I'm just being creative. I'm trying to indulge myself in a little bit of creative speculation, because I have a feeling that I think the state may be prosecuting too extreme of a theory. Okay. And while it may have worked with Charlie, okay, I think because Wendy is a few more links down the chain, I think, let's just say the state's theory is like a couple of centimeters off when it comes to what actually happened with Charlie. When you go a few links down, that error is going to compound itself. And by the time you get to Wendy, they're going to be way off in their actual theory. Okay. So I think it is important for us to just carefully think what really could have happened. Okay. And so I guess, using my creative mind and just kind of speculating, okay, I think what seems a little more realistic is I think Charlie just laid enough indirect information and just openly let Katie McBanoa know that there was a lot of money available, okay, that the family was willing to pay a certain amount of money if the problem with Dan Markel could be solved, okay. And then also just saying, oh, by the way, oh, yeah, I was talking to my sister. Oh, she's so pissed off. She says that Danny's going to be in Tallahassee for the next week, but then he has to go to New York. Not suggesting that it has to do with anything, but just like openly just giving Katie just a ton of information. And then maybe Katie could have said, who is this guy, Dan Markel? And maybe he could have said like, oh, look at this newspaper clipping. This is who he is, or maybe just letting her know, just giving her indirect information where they could figure out where he lived and all that. So I'm just thinking that, if you wanted to be really clever to have somebody killed, the best way to do it would be never to tell people to kill him, okay? But just to give a ton of information where they know that if they were to kill this guy and then come to you, you've openly said that you have a ton of money, right? And then maybe Charlie could have even done something more extreme. He could have told Katie, oh, by the way, in my safe, I have like a couple $100,000. I got like $100,000, and that money is there because, if we can solve the problem with Danny, I'm willing to pay this, and just making it super clear that he had like raw meat, knowing that the bears would come and get it. So I'm just thinking that, now, of course, it's kind of a stupid thing because even though he thinks he's not directly orchestrating, he probably did have to give her regularly, like a lot of updates about, where Dan Markel was going to be, when he was going to be out of town. And necessarily then he would have to be talking to Wendy. And I'm sure just in conversation, when he talks to Wendy, he'd probably be saying, oh, gosh, and so where's Danny going to be this week? And she would just be saying, oh, I think he has to go to New York. But I think before he goes to New York, I think he's going to be in town until next Tuesday. And, he would just kind of take the information and just kind of like, Wendy wouldn't know necessarily that it would have to do with anything, like a murder, but he could just kind of maintain information and just kind of openly talk to Katie and just kind of make it obvious that there would be an opportunity, to make a lot of money if they could kill this guy. It's just an idea. The other thing I think Charlie may have done, just based on the conversations that Wendy had with Jeff Lacasse, okay, it sounds to me like Charlie probably did tell Wendy, hey, I've looked into it, and just kind of not saying anything definite, But I think maybe like a good mafia, like imagine like a mafia movie, like how do mafia people talk? They're very smart. I think Charlie, thinking he's kind of like a mafia guy, thinking he's kind of a badass, I think Charlie could have said something to Wendy like, but geez, if something were to happen to Danny, boy, that would really solve your problems. I'm not saying it will happen, but if it did happen, just kind of like saying things like that. And then maybe also telling Wendy, hey, I don't know, maybe I talk too much, but I've kind of opened my mouth with my girlfriend, and I know she's got contacts in the underworld, and who knows? I mean, I think there's a lot of people in Miami that don't like Danny, and who knows? I mean, if something were to happen to him, I would hate to think, like, what if, he might even tell Wendy, he might say, like, geez, I don't know what I would do if Katie wanted to extort me. Maybe she and her bad friends, maybe if they were to do something to Danny, they might come back to me and ask me for money. I'm just saying, like, in other words, there's ways you can play it where you play it so subtle and you play it so indirectly that technically you're not orchestrating the murder. Okay, you're just sort of you're just leaving a lot of raw meat out where the bears could come and get it. And so I think, now I don't think that's a defense, right? I think Charlie could still be convicted of his crime, even on that set of facts. But because it's a softer set of facts, I think that might change the way we would understand Wendy's role. Okay. And I think with that softer involvement, where she doesn't know exactly what's happening, she's just getting a lot of hints. And maybe Charlie's maybe suspiciously always asking, like, where's Danny going to be? Is he going to be in town? When is he coming back in town? When is he leaving town? That maybe just kind of letting her know, like, oh, gee, I would hate for, Katie's friends to do something and then try to extort me, kind of like leaving these hints. Maybe Wendy could have sort of read between the lines and said, sounds to me like, God, I would hate if something happened to Danny, like, God, if something happened to him, that would be terrible. And I think that might explain maybe some of the conversations she had with Jeff Lacasse, okay? Because Jeff Lacasse, I think he said something to the police like, oh yeah, Wendy said that, her brother had looked into hiring a hitman, but, it was kind of expensive. And just kind of like these very indefinite statements, but definitely flirting around the idea that somebody could be paid, to kill Danny, And so I think Wendy kind of had an idea that it could happen, right? And I think even with Jeff Lacasse, I think she even made comments like, God, I'm screwed here in Tallahassee. The only thing that could save me is if something happened to Danny, well, that would solve the problem. But, and I think Jeff Lacasse had mentioned that she had talked like that. Okay, so what that suggests to me is maybe inside the Adelson family, they had also been talking like that. Like, well, I don't know if it's going to happen, but if it did happen, God, I have all these criminal friends, I would hate to think, some of these criminal friends, they know I've got cash, right? And maybe I've opened my mouth too much around some of them. So, if they want to, extort me, I'm a sitting duck, but gee, that would be terrible if something happened to Danny, And I think maybe that might be the actually what happened within the Adelson family. That they wouldn't have the guts. They're too they're too cowardly to directly risk everything and just directly orchestrate a murder. So that maybe what was going on was that Charlie was just kind of saying, "Gee, that would be terrible, if Katie knew how much money I've got, and maybe his parents were like, and how much money do you need, and maybe like sending him extra cash, and gee, that would be terrible if Katie found out, but just sort of with that very indirect, passive communication, I think that's more consistent with sort of like the atmosphere of the Adelsons, where I think they're very subtle people. And I think they may know kind of that art, that nasty witchcraft of how to effectuate destruction through remote control, by sort of just kind of putting yourself in a position where something could happen, but not directly orchestrating it, So I think that may be what happened. And it may kind of make more sense of the comments that Wendy made to Jeff Lacasse. Okay. So if that is true, okay, if it really is kind of that softer set of facts, okay, the thing I'm concerned about, and by the way, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumbled here, but I do work in criminal defense. Okay, I used to be an attorney. I used to be a Florida attorney, and in fact, I went to the same law school that Wendy went to. Okay, a few years before she did, right? And for the last like 12 or 13 years, I don't keep my bar license anymore, and I work in criminal defense, but I work as a consultant. Okay. I work in legal research, and I do appeals. I do the writing the motions, kind of in the strategy. I work on the strategy for criminal defense. And so just as a person who myself, as because I work in criminal defense, there are a few things about this case that make me uncomfortable. And they kind of remind me of the Casey Anthony case, okay? Because what happened in the Casey Anthony case, and I think this was the basic error of the state of Florida, okay, the state attorney that prosecuted Casey Anthony, is I think the state was trying to over prosecute the case against Casey Anthony. Okay, now here's the thing. I'm not saying that Casey didn't directly kill her child. Okay, I think probably the most likely thing is I think Casey was probably trying to put her I think the most likely explanation is I think Casey Anthony was probably trying to help her daughter sleep or keep her from waking up by giving her, like, say, tranquilizers or something like that. And I think probably something happened, and the daughter, like, kind of reacted badly and died, or something like that happened. Um, so, on that set of facts, you could say that maybe Casey Anthony didn't directly intend to cause her daughter to die. That's possible, right? We'll never know the answer. I mean, maybe she did kill her on purpose, but the bottom line is that the actual evidence in the Casey Anthony case, I don't think really supports a first degree murder charge, right? I think if you're honest, even though she may have directly killed her daughter, maybe Casey Anthony is a first degree murderer, but I think the actual evidence in the case, I think, is more consistent, I think, with something closer to a manslaughter. Okay, just doing something very reckless with the child, and just kind of putting her in unreasonable danger and ending up getting killed, right? So likewise, well, hold on. And so the problem is the state sort of overcharged Casey Anthony, right? And because they did that, there was more room for her defense to just put a lot of reasonable doubt. And so I think Casey Anthony would have been convicted if the state had just committed itself to a softer theory as to how she was responsible for her daughter being killed. So the same thing could happen with Wendy. I think if we push too hard on an exaggeratedly, like a more severe a more severe theory where we're trying to pretend that maybe Charlie was directly orchestrating, and that Wendy somehow was like a co-conspirator in directly orchestrating the murder, I think we might run into that Casey Anthony problem where we're overreaching and we're overcharging her, and we're sort of, the state's theory might be more severe than what really happened, and maybe a little softer. Okay. And so if what I'm suggesting is closer to what happened, and by the way, none of us know what really happened, right? But we're all just imagining. But if what I'm proposing is a little closer to what actually happened, okay, then under that set of facts, okay, Wendy would not be a co-conspirator. Okay, she would be, at best, she would be an accessory to murder, which is a little less than being a co-conspirator. Okay, so basically, under the theory that I'm proposing, that the Adelsons were just giving hints and they were just kind of leaving the raw meat for the bears to come and get it. Basically, under that set of facts, what makes Wendy a conspirator is that even though she didn't know for sure, right? But Wendy was probably given some information, like maybe Charlie called her a few days and said, "Hey, you may want to get your TV repairman on Tuesday morning, okay? Because I think maybe something's wrong with your TV," right? So that would be understood by Wendy, like, hey, something could happen on Tuesday morning, right? Or you might want to be real careful where the kids are on Tuesday morning, because something might happen with your TV, and what about the kids? And just sort of like all these indirect hints suggesting that something could happen, right? But under that set of facts, Wendy would not know for sure what was going to happen. It was just a suggestion. It was just kind of like a hint, right? So if you don't know for sure what's happening, then that doesn't tie her close enough to be an actual co-conspirator, right? Because a conspiracy has to be a group of people who share the same understanding and have the same plan together, right? In this case, they just gave Wendy sort of hints, maybe, just hints, suggestions, hey, you need to get your TV fixed on Tuesday. You better watch your kids on Tuesday. Maybe kind of keep an eye out for your kids, or like, say, he might say something, hey, you're going to have to fix your TV on Tuesday. Your mom just got you an appointment for a TV repairman. And he might say, and what are you going to do about the kids? Just kind of like suggesting that it's going to be a big day, right? And so under that set of facts, Wendy doesn't really know what's happening. Okay, she doesn't really know, but she knows that something probably could happen, right? So it's not that she directly orchestrated or participated directly in effectuating the killing of a person. It's more like she had information that, based on, let's say, just her course of dealings with Charlie and just common sense, she had at least an idea that something could happen, right? And so basically she had an idea that something could happen, and she did nothing to interfere with it. And so in that sense, she was sort of helping them do what maybe they were going to do. So in that sense, I would call that like in the neighborhood of being an accessory to a murder, where you have the idea that maybe something could happen, and then you do nothing to interfere with it. And basically, in that sense, you're sort of assisting with the plan, even though you're not directly involved in the actual conspiracy. So in my opinion, I think just like with Casey Anthony, okay, if you overcharge it, and if you're too aggressive and you have maybe an unrealistically severe theory of the case, you may actually, because you're actually missing the reality, you, there's more room for the defense to just throw in a lot of reasonable doubt, okay, and you might end up with with a not guilty, just like the Casey Anthony. Whereas if you could just scale back the prosecution and maybe just try to focus on a theory where Wendy was an accessory, okay, that could work, and that could be, I think, more effective. So anyway, basically, what are some other reasons why I think that that this may be a good theory? Okay, like number one, Jeff Lacasse. Jeff Lacasse never said, "Oh, Wendy told me that my brother actually has a plan to have Danny killed." Okay, now I understand, maybe she did know, but and maybe she would have good reasons not to tell Jeff Lacasse. But why would she tell Jeff Lacasse? Why would she tell him, "Oh, by the way, my brother did look into hiring a hitman," and just kind of, why would she even offer anything to Jeff Lacasse? So, I'm thinking that maybe probably the best way to charge Wendy is to create a theory of the case that is very closely matching Jeff Lacasse's testimony, And I think if you take Jeff Lacasse as kind of like the the closest thing to the real truth of what was happening with Wendy, it sort of paints a picture to me more like she kind of maybe had an idea that it could happen, but maybe wasn't directly involved in the actual conspiracy to make it happen, right? So to me, that just sounds a lot more like an accessory. And then, of course, even Jeff Lacasse, when he was interviewed, he even told the police, he says, "I don't think Wendy was directly involved, but I do think Wendy could have known that it was going to happen, or could have had some idea that it was going to happen." Okay, I think that's pretty much what Jeff Lacasse said. So if the state can develop a theory that kind of matches the best witness, and I think Jeff Lacasse is by far the most credible and I think the most useful witness, I think, really showing that Wendy had some idea that this could happen, right? I think if we can sort of tailor, if the state could sort of tailor its theory to sort of match everything that Jeff Lacasse said, I think that would probably, give us the strongest chance that a jury would feel like, hey, this really matches, the state's theory really matches what the best witnesses are saying. And I think that would probably be the most effective way to prosecute her. And I think, just for us who are curious, I think it may explain some of the mystery of this case, like how involved was Wendy. And it might help to understand that, maybe she was just given hints, just hints, suggestions, indirect comments. And maybe she just kind of, had to read between the lines and put it together. And, maybe Charlie was smart enough to say, "Hey, you really need to watch your kids around the TV when the TV repairman comes." Like saying, you really need to watch the kids. Like he could have said something that just made it very clear that for Wendy, this is serious, And at the same time, you could imagine a situation where even Charlie doesn't know for sure if it's going to happen, right? Because Charlie's not telling Katie, "Oh, your guys need to go on Tuesday." No. What Charlie could have said to Katie is, "Well, what I know is that Danny, he has to go to New York on Tuesday, or he has to go to New York on Thursday. So he'll be in Tallahassee until Wednesday. Wendy, she's so upset at him," and blah, blah, blah. Like, not saying anything about a murder, but just giving her information, like specific information of where Danny's going to be, right? And so then Katie can just by herself, she can direct the murder, directly with Sigfrido, and they can organize, how they're going to rent the car and, what hotel they're going to stay at or whatever. And then Charlie, all he's guilty of is just having a conversation where he says, hey, I know where Danny's going to be between these days. And oh, yeah. And Wendy's so upset at him. And, just kind of like Charlie, in his mind, he would think like, I didn't tell them what to do, but I think, in a sense, morally, and I think even legally, if you set out enough raw meat and there's bears in your neighborhood, if you set up enough raw meat, the bears are going to come. And so I think possibly, in a weird way, I think Charlie maybe was extorted, but I think he invited himself to be extorted. And I think in a sense, from a kind of a remote distance, he was sort of orchestrating his own extortion. Okay. So I think in a funny way, I feel bad that the state had to sort of reflexively sort of oppose his extortion theory, because I think if the state were more creative, they could say, well, yeah, he made sort of a charade of being extorted. The state could say, yeah, you were extorted, but you orchestrated your extortion. You know what I'm saying? And so I think in that sense, I think Charlie, was totally guilty. And I wish the state had maybe played into his defense a little better. And it would have been funny to see Georgia. I think her name is Koppelman. I'm sorry if I don't get the names right. I apologize, but I think her name is Koppelman. Anyway, but if the prosecutor Georgia, if she had told in closing arguments, hey, you know what, the state actually agrees to a point. We actually agree with Charlie. We agree he was extorted. Except the funny thing is here, Charlie actually orchestrated his extortion. I think that would have been funny, and I think people would have seen right. It would have given a very accurate picture, I think, of what may have actually happened. But I am concerned that we could have a sort of a Casey Anthony situation here, where the state could just maybe, because I think the state is so stubborn about doing everything the opposite of what Charlie says. So Charlie says he's extorted. So the state commits itself to a theory that he was directly orchestrating, this murder, using Kate McBanowa just as like an intermediate agent, but that Charlie was really just making sure to tell everybody exactly what to do, when in fact it could be more like Charlie just sort of left the raw meat out, for the bears to come and get it, basically. Still orchestrating it, but he would be orchestrating his extortion as opposed to orchestrating the actual murder. So just some ideas, but I do think that whenever you have like several links in the chain, okay, the further down you go in the chain, all right, the more an error at an earlier link in the chain is going to compound itself as you go further down the line. And I think even though the state was able to get a prosecution, they were able to get a conviction on Charlie, possibly on maybe not the most accurate theory. Okay. In other words, the state won on the theory that Charlie was more directly involved in the murder. And they actually got the conviction, but it could be still that the state's theory is not exactly what happened, right? And I'm just concerned that as you go further down the links in the chain, that error could sort of multiply. And by the time you get to Wendy, you end up with what I think of as a Casey Anthony situation, where the state is sort of they're overreaching in their theory. And in reality, what happened was a little softer. Okay, so I'm a little concerned about that. And the other thing too, is if the state decides to sort of change its theory, okay, well, that could cause Charlie to be able to file a motion to set aside his conviction based on a newly discovered evidence. So if the state starts producing a ton of evidence that this was really just kind of like an orchestrated sort of passive aggressive, kind of like it was made to look like an extortion, but really they were sort of orchestrating their extortion. Charlie could actually present that as newly discovered evidence, potentially to sort of undo his conviction on the theory that the state beat him on. So I think the state has to really think about how they're going to prosecute Wendy. And, I'm concerned that if they want to soften the theory, they may open up room for Charlie to reopen his case, So, because I work in criminal defense, I always have to think of things like this, like, what could go wrong? What is the weakness? And I think in this case, the weakness I see in the prosecution is I think they're maybe overcommitted, I think, to a more severe set of facts than what may have really happened, possibly, right? And anyway, just some ideas. And by the way, when I say these things, I'm not saying what actually happened, okay? None of us know what happened, okay? I'm just trying to open the conversation to maybe all of us maybe approach maybe a more realistic scenario that would explain the evidence in this case. So anyway, really appreciate your patience, and thanks for watching.